All right, so next part of oops, not 9.2, it's 9.1. Kind of continuing on. So yesterday we talked about simplifying and then dividing, but when we divided, there was no square root in the denominator. That's like a big thing. We're not allowed to have a square root in the denominator. So there are um, a couple of different like things to like think about. Um, so if we had, we did whatever and we got 3 square root of 5 like that. Okay, I'm not allowed to have square root of 5 in the denominator. And it's not that hard to get rid of. What we do is we multiply by whatever number that is. Okay, now on the top, we are not allowed to multiply a number that has a square root with a number that doesn't. Now, I'm not talking about like 9, like has the square root of 9. No, the 5 is under the square root and the 3 does not have a square root. So we cannot multiply that together. We just stick them together. It's like multiplying 3 times x. You just put 3 and x next to each other. Okay, we can multiply a number, whether they're the same or different, doesn't matter, if they are both under a square root. So square root of 5 times the square root of 5 makes the square root of 25. And I can do the square root of 25, which is 5. And then that would be a simplified answer. Okay, it maybe doesn't look as simple as the first one, but that's what we have to do. No square roots in the denominator. Okay, now you could have, let me look at your assignment here. All right, so looks like you just have like one of them like this. So let's say we had square root of 7 over the square root of 20. Okay, so you could just very simply do just what we did on the top, square root of 20 times the square root of 20, and go from there. Okay, but there's a little bit of an easier way to do it. You're going to have to, so let me do it the long way. If I just did just like I did on the top, square root of 20, square root of 20. Now in this one, I can multiply both of them. Okay, 20 times 20 is 400. And you might not think so, but well, the square root of 400 is 20. And so if you notice on the top, square root of 5, square root of 5, we ended up with 5 because the square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 20, square root of 20, we're going to end up with 20. That happens on every single problem. Whatever number you have, you're going to get back to that number, but without the square root. So what makes this problem a little bit more challenging is I can't just write square root of 140. I need to see, can I simplify 140? And this one maybe isn't too terrible because to simplify it, I just need to start breaking it down. And numbers that end in 0 multiply times 10, so that makes things a little bit easier. But as we go, okay, can't do anything with a 7, can't do anything with a 2, can't do anything with a 5, can't do anything with a 2. 5 times 2 is 10. So I have a pair of 2's, so I write a 2. I have a 7 and a 5 left over, which means 7 times 5 is 35. So I get 2 square root of 35 over 20. Okay, and then I have a 2 and a 20. I can reduce those. I can divide both of those by 2. So what I would end up with is the square root of 35 over 10. So that's like a lot of like steps to get there. And I got to break down this 140. So it's always better I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning. It's always better to ask yourself, can I reduce? Can I simplify first? Even though there's a square root in the denominator, can I simplify that first and then like kind of keep going? So the answer is yes. So remember I said yesterday, how can I simplify a radical? Well, I can simplify it by doing this over here. Broke down 140, 14 times 10, and I worked my way down. The other way is just what times what is 20, but one of the numbers needs to have a square root. Okay, and so what I get is 2 square root of 5, because the square root of 4 is 2. Okay, and so it might look a little bit harder or different, but watch what happens. So how do I don't, the 2 is fine in the denominator, just can't have the square root of 5. Okay, and so how do I get rid of that? I do the square root of 5 times the square root of 5. Okay, both of these, 7 and 5, are underneath the square root, so I can multiply those together. On the bottom, square root of 5 and the square root of 5 is 25. Square root of 25 is 5. Two times 5 is 10. So we get the same answer. But look at how big the numbers are in the blue part. 140, 400, got to break down 140, versus the biggest number on the bottom is 35. And we don't even do anything with that. It's just 7 times 5 is 35 under the square root. So I think the bottom way is definitely easier. Okay? So just remember that like this problem right here, the bottom one, it could have started like this, or okay, and then we would break it apart just like we did yesterday, and we go like back to the beginning. Okay, so there's a couple of them that start out, actually, yeah, there's 2 of them that start out like that. Okay, anything that you can simplify, you want to do that first. It will make the problem so much easier. Okay, so even if so if you started like this and you had excuse me, goodness gracious, let's see, 5 over 20. Okay, and so here's our 20. You could start to do this whole thing, but I noticed that I can just reduce that fraction. 5 over 20, I can divide both of those by 5. And so we get 5 divided by 5 is 1. 20 divided by 5 is 4. Well, the square root of 1 is 1, and the square root of 4 is 2. Done. Okay, so watch for that. If you can do that, that'll save obviously a ton of time. Look at that one little problem I did down here in the corner, and then the other one is all big and everywhere. Okay, so that's one thing you're going to see. If it's multiply like this one, where'd it go? Like this 2 square root of 5, that I can do 5 on top and bottom because there's no plus or minus sign in between the 2 and the square root of 5. This stuff, where it's just multiply top and bottom by whatever the square root is. And then you'll actually, because you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of those. Okay, 9 problems like this. The second thing is a little bit harder, but it's not like terrible. So if I had this, so that minus sign, or if it was a plus sign, that throws a wrench into like what we can do. We do not just do square root of 3 on the top and the bottom. Can't do it. Okay, because of that minus sign, or if it was a plus sign, kind of attaches things together. There is a plus or a minus sign in the middle. That means we got to do something different. Okay, and what we have to do is we multiply the top and the bottom by the same thing, but the opposite sign. Okay, if this was a plus sign in the black part, then I would put a minus sign in the red part. Opposite sign is really important. Okay, because what we're going to really end up doing is distributing like everything. Okay, so I'm going to do 2 times 5 is 10, and I'm going to do 2 times the square root of 3. Can't do that, so I just write it. 2 square root 3. Okay, no, do not put square root of 6. Can't do that. If a number's under the square root and a number's not under the square root, we just put them next to each other. Okay, this one, we got a FOIL, if you remember that, or just distribute everything. 5 times 5 is 25. Then I get plus 5 square root of 3. And this one I get minus, there's a negative in front of that square root, minus 5 square root of 3. And minus the square root of 9. I can do square root of 3 and square root of 3, I get 9. Okay, so what happens here, positive 5 square root of 3, negative 5 square root of 3, those cancel each other out. Okay, and then what also happens is I can do the square root of 9, 3. 25 minus 3 is 22. Okay, excuse me. So I successfully got rid of the square root in the denominator. The one last thing I have to do is I need to look at all the numbers that are on the outside. And if I can divide something with all those numbers, I need to do that. Okay, and in this case, I can divide all of them by 2. So after I do that, 10 divided by 2 is 5. 2 divided by 2 is 1. I don't have to put the 1 in the front. If you did, that's fine, but you don't have to. 22 divided by 2 is 11. We finally get to the end where there's no square root in the denominator, and it is simplified. Okay, so you're going to have 3 of those. They're going to be very similar to what I just did. You may or may not have to reduce where I did over here in the red. That may or may not happen. So don't feel like that's going to happen on every problem. Okay, it could, but it doesn't have to. But just 3 of those. And the numbers are pretty easy to work with. Okay. All right. And then the last 2 problems, you're just going to plug in a number and work it out. Okay. So you're going to plug in, it looks like 10 on one of them and 60 on another, and then just simplify the square root. Okay. So most of your assignment will actually be 3 problems like this, and then 2 plug in your numbers. Okay. All right. So there's another part of our square roots. We got one more part to go on Monday, and then we'll kind of continue with the chapter, okay? All right, have a good Friday. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you Monday.